Welcome to the Indian Gaming Association's The New Normal webcast. My name is Lisa Johnson. I'm the conference manager for the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is muted by default except for our speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. Now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce Victor Rocha, conference chairman of the Indian Gaming Association.
Thank you, Lisa. Welcome to the New Normal, your go-to source for discussions on the gaming industry and key issues facing Native American tribes. I'm Victor Rocha, joined with my co-host Jason Giles, Executive Director of the Indian Gaming Association. Good morning, Jason.
Morning.
Today, we're taking a closer look at the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, a sweeping legislative proposal that is central to Donald Trump's second-term agenda. While it's being promoted as a bold vision for national renewal, this bill could have serious consequences for Indian country, touching on everything from federal recognition, education, energy development, and public lands. So joining us are our good friends Larry Wright, Executive Director of the National Congress of American Indians. Good morning, Larry. And our dear friend John Hart, attorney for MAPETSI Policy Group. Good morning, John. They're here to help us understand what this means for tribal government, tribal sovereignty, and self-government. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you doing? Larry, your microphone's off. There we go.
Sorry about that.
I know we've all been doing this 1,000 years, haven't we?
Right.
Since
right.
the pandemic. Wow. Hey, everyone, good morning. So I was just reading today, and you know, the Big Beautiful Bill isn't a done deal yet, but it looks pretty close. I was reading everything I could about it, and you know, it's back to the House. There's a lot of outrage. Last night, the big issue in the gambling world was about this language that was slipped in about taxation for gambling losses. And so I'm looking at that, how that's going to affect the tribes, and that. But this one is a little different. You know, this is a more comprehensive look at how this affects Indian country. So, gentlemen, what is the Big Beautiful Bill, and how is it being positioned by the Trump administration, its allies, as a cornerstone of the second-term agenda? Let's start with you, Larry. Since you've been working with the National Congress of America, and I know you've been involved. You know, I don't even see my cousin anymore. He's just so busy. So, good morning, Larry.
Good morning. Yeah, I mean, this is it's a big, beautiful something, but you know, we continue to, you know, now that the Senate has passed their version and looking at what's going on with that, you know, it really kind of goes back to Indian country really coming together to take all of this on, and you know, kind of with Trump's agenda and his EOs and the effect that they've had either directly or indirectly. NCAI's work very closely with other tribal organizations, IGA included, that have watched Congress negotiate this bill, and you know, which some in Congress have tried to use as a platform for policy change rather than budgeting measures. And you know, some of those provisions positively impact Indian country, but it's without a doubt that this bill will have some long-lasting impacts on tribal members throughout the country.
You know, I was just up in Portland a couple weeks ago, and you know, the Columbia River is such an amazing river. You know, it's this big, majestic river that means so much. And, you know, at our annual show, I did an interview with Shannon Wheeler from the Nez Perce, and you know, that was his big deal, was about this Columbia River deal and stuff, and that's being eradicated. I know it's not part of the Big Beautiful Bill, but it's part of this strategy of just dismantling what the America we know into some America that belongs to some white paper somewhere.
I mean,
just
you know, just to give some context about where you know, how we got here. You know, this bill is being forced through the reconciliation process, and you know, Congress established this reconciliation process 51 years ago. You know, right in the wake of the Nixon you know, the Nixon scandals in 1974, Congress enacted the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act because, you know, the Nixon administration was not. Congress would appropriate money, and the Nixon administration was refusing to spend some of it. So that the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act was Congress's attempt to reclaim their power of the purse, which you've heard a lot about, recently. So, but these reconciliation packages, the provisions in the bill have to directly relate to the budget or spending or taxation, and they usually only come around when you have one party in power, when you have one party controls the Senate, the House, and the White House, and that's what we have now. Obama used it to pass the Affordable Care Act. Trump used it to pass the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and Biden used it for both the American Recovery Plan as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's what we have here. It's a one-sided type of deal where one party, I mean, Democrats were not consulted at all on this bill. This is solely a Republican bill, and that's why it's an overreach is what it is.
And yeah, it seems to be that was it the Senate parliamentarian seems to be like the big hero of this whole thing. Everything comes back and they're just saying, no, you can't do that. And it's kind of been fascinating to watch, from my layman's point of view,
Yeah, I guess I'll just give a quick readout of where some of the money is going in the bill, at least as far as the Senate passed version. So as far as what it's going to cost the federal government in spending and deficit spending, $4 trillion go to extend the tax cuts permanently. $150 billion goes for immigration enforcement and to border wall construction. $150 billion goes to additional military funding. And you got about $150 billion for the SALT tax, $150 billion for no tax on tips. And there are a number of other promises that the president made that are included in the Senate version, no tax on overtime. So it comes to about $4.8 trillion in additional spending over 10 years. How are they going to pay for that? They don't come close to paying for it, but their offsets and how they are going to try and limit those deficits are cutting Medicaid. The Senate version cuts Medicaid by approximately $930 billion. It cuts SNAP, the food assistance program, by approximately $300 billion in the Senate. And another big portion of it is clawing back approximately $500 billion from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act clean energy programs. So when you add all that up, it still comes to a $3.3 trillion deficit over 10 years to the federal government. And that's why you're hearing from the House members right now that this bill is actually worse, or at least it's more spending than what they passed last month. That the House bill, I believe the approximate cost was 2.8 trillion. And this adds another 500 billion to that.
So, I mean, Larry, let's just go over down some of the impacts on Indian country because, we're looking at SBA, IHS, and BIA, just to name a few. I mean, is there any positive in this bill for Indian country?
Yeah, I think some provisions that we've seen and are looking at closely is, it does provide funding for tribal governments for Homeland Security grant program funding. Tribes are looking to be placed in parity with states for determining whether a child has special needs for purposes of adoption credit. Contributions from tribal governments on parity with other governments for purposes of taxes at beneficiary accounts. Tribal members are exempt from the SNAP work requirements. And I think one of the other ones that we see is tribal members are also, and those eligible to receive services from IHS are exempt from the Medicaid work requirements. And that was something Indian country has pushed very hard. We know that those work requirements in some of our reservations in those rural areas are just impossible to meet. And so having those issues uh, as positive outcomes as we try to look for those are very significant, especially when some of our clinics are dependent on operations, so it's third-party billing opportunities to keep their clinics open. And so, if we're trying to find some positives, those are some that we're seeing. At least they were protected.
And John, but just to get back into it, I mean, we've been working, this coalition of tribal sovereignty, as Larry said, 36 organizations right now are part of it. And, we've been pushing out letters and information for a solid 6 months now, really since November, since Trump was elected. But I mean, one of the things is, we've had frank discussions along the way. I mean, we just haven't been that successful in stopping a lot of this. And what did Murkowski, where did she draw the line in the sand for us? And are there any of those tax provisions still in there that the House had two favorable tax provisions for Indian country? Are they still in there?
Well, as Larry said, but the Senate version did retain the child adoption tax credit parity
Oh,
for
that's right. Okay.
tribes. Yeah, so that under current law, where a family adopts a child with special needs, that special needs determination has to be done by the state court. This bill clears it up, amends the tax code to clarify that those adoptions that are approved by a tribal court are also respected, and that family can benefit from that federal tax credit for adopting a child with special needs. Unfortunately, the Senate bill did not retain the provision that would have amended the low-income housing tax credit program that would have required states to acknowledge housing needs in Indian country as part of their qualified allocation plans in order to receive the federal tax credit. So, Indian countries, that program has been in existence since 1985 or so. It's the largest federal tax credit program out there, doing a lot of good to help build low-income homes. But unfortunately, Indian country doesn't benefit directly from that. We have to rely on the states. I know, Jason, you and I have good ties to New Mexico. The state of New Mexico over the years has been really good about sharing those tax credits with the tribes for housing projects in Indian country, but a number of other states do not. So that's why we need that fix.
I imagine Oklahoma was just going to get raked over the coals for this,
Yeah, I tried to do a state by state comparison. We work for a tribe in Idaho, and over the 10-year period that I did a review on, the state of Idaho didn't give any of their tax credits to the tribes in the state of Idaho. But New Mexico gave about 20%. So it just varies so much state to state. But yeah, Jason asked about what did Murkowski do? I don't know behind the scenes, but I can, in her role as chair of the Senate Interior Appropriations Committee, as chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, I think she had a big role to play in retaining that exemption for Medicaid and adding the exemption for SNAP, because the exemption from the work requirement for SNAP was not included in the House bill. That was added in the Senate bill, and I think that probably was in large part due to her advocacy. Don't know that for sure, but I'm betting on it.
And I guess Victor, we'll jump right into the next steps. I will say, from a gaming standpoint, there is a provision in there that gamblers can only deduct up to 90% of their gambling losses at this point.
Yep.
So, I don't know that I heard AGA really wasn't going to say anything about it or do anything about it. It's hard to know.
The industry knows about it now. Diane Titus tweeted this morning that she's going to take a look at it, that she's going to go after it, see what she can do. But the entire industry is freaking out. And if you stop and think about what it means for tribes and poker and your gambling. I mean, it'll have effect on the tribes too. So we'll do a deeper dive down the road on that also.
But that, John,
and it's pain all the way across,
But I mean, I don't know what the sympathy level is for gamblers who self-report their losses and get a deduction.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I saw one of the big gamblers last night on Twitter saying, "Hey, listen, we're just going to go offshore." You know what I mean? So these what the professional gamblers are saying on Twitter. You know what I mean? We're going to break the law and go offshore, and we won't report it, I guess. So I don't know.
Right.
But everybody's still freaking out. Everyone in the industry was shocked by that last night. I think I read every post on the Twitter platform last night.
But John, what does it say? I mean, that just shows their desperation to try to grab revenue from anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what that scored. Yeah, it's a short provision. It's section 70114 on page 237 of this 850-page bill. So.
Wow, I shouldn't laugh. We shouldn't laugh. We should be crying. You know that.
But Larry, coming off of NCI's mid-year, there was a lot of discussion at your mid-year about what to do about SBA. A lot of tribes have so much money tied up in the SBA programs, and then let alone the IHS and BIA cuts. I mean, what do we do from here? In terms of, because we're going to have this budget fight again. This one's been bad enough, Larry, but they're going to get it done. And then in September, we're right back to debating next year's budget. And for those that haven't seen the president's submitted budget for next year, it's even lower levels of spending across the board and more federal government deductions. So this is not going to end, at all, whatsoever. And I'm just scratching my head. I mean, the next budget fight next year, Larry, we could still do this whole, we can write letters again and do and all that. But if they're going to keep using reconciliation, John, they're just going to keep jamming everything through, right? What do you think, Larry? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they'll try to use every tool they can to make it go forward, and just in those conversations about with SBA and even 8A program and looking at that impact that it has on tribes and ANCs and individual tribal members in those programs. There's starting to be concern of how much do we continue to push back and raise these issues without having, as someone said this morning on a different call, without them taking a closer look at these tribal set-asides and opportunities. And so, to that point of how much is too much in trying to raise those issues, but at the same time, you can't afford to sit back either, and making sure that we continue to raise these issues. And I think that's, if there is a positive in those efforts to work on both sides of the hill, that we do have Republican support on many of these issues, and unfortunately, some of these things that were saved were because of that. But I would say by extension, knowing that they support the treaty and trust responsibility of the United States, I think is also, is really shown a light on, as we all know in Indian country, how important the differences between discretionary spending and mandatory appropriations, and knowing that treaties are a law of the land, why that isn't mandatory, and funding continues to be a problem and is exacerbated in times like this, when we know that that's the federal government's responsibility, but we're still a line item that's being affected. And but again, SBA has shown a lot of opportunities for tribes and going through those programs, and to have that cut along with, or the potential of being cut along with the other funding cuts, IHS, BIA, all of those, just compounds the issues.
Yeah. John, oh, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to make a quick distinction though, because we're talking about reconciliation where they only need a simple majority in both the House and Senate, but you're talking about the president's
Yeah.
budget and the annual appropriation process. I think fortunately for Indian country, that's going to require compromise, is going to require bipartisan support.
Okay. Okay.
They're going to need 60 votes in the Senate to get any kind of appropriations bill over, enacted into law. As Larry said, we've got champions of Indian country on appropriations committees in both the House and Senate. The chairman of the House Appropriations Committee is a member of the Chickasaw Nation. Mike Simpson, who's chairman of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, has tribes in his district. He knows Indian country. He respects tribal sovereignty. He's fought for more than a decade to, protect some of those lines there. Murkowski is chair of the Senate Interior Appropriations Committee. So, in order to get that through, that annual appropriations bill through, they're going to have to compromise. More than likely, they're not going to compromise, and we're going to get a continuing resolution like we do every year. And this past year, we had a year-long continuing resolution. And honestly, when it comes down to a choice between another year-long CR or some of these cuts that have been proposed, I think Indian country would take the year-long CR as long as we have some stipulations in there.
Mhm. Right. I mean, so John, looking forward, here's the thing that there's been very little discussion about from Democrats. They're out there sounding the alarm of X million people are going to lose their health care, and so many children are going to be pushed off of free and reduced lunch and all these other programs. But they're sounding these the sky is falling, and it is. But when you look at it, they phased this in over a number of years. So you may not get the full impact. You're not going to get it next year. Like nobody's probably going to feel too much impact next year in 2026. But 27, 28, I mean, all the way out, I think it's up to, depending on the program, stretches out to like 2032. I mean, how does that work, John? Because that's really, I don't, what do you call it, Victor? That's just like, playing
Cruel.
long-term underhanded pool or something.
It's cruel.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cruelty is the name of the game, man.
But they're pushing it
Cruelty
off.
is the name of the game.
But let's say if Democrats are back in charge, or even if they do well in the midterms, it's setting them up for like, to point the finger at the other party or the party that is in control when these cuts really start to kick in and become severe.
Yeah.
But
Go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead,
no,
Larry.
I was just gonna say, by design, those you say it's going to be a slow rollout. I think some of those things that will hit people hardest, tribal members hardest, are being designed to go into effect after the midterm election. So it doesn't have, or they're hoping it doesn't have, that people don't feel the pain before then and make their vote be known. And so I think that's, you want to talk about, you said cruel, underhanded. I think that's one of the pieces that will be a huge impact for our tribal communities and individual members by not initially being affected, but knowing that it's there as ever, as the policy people dig into it in the specifics and looking at those timelines when they start, that's going to be the other continuing impact, that negative impact that this will have.
Yeah, I need to take a closer look at it, Jason, because I know initial proposals had those Medicaid work requirements and the SNAP work requirements not starting until 2027 calendar year, but I'm pretty sure the Senate version, those kick in January of 26.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I need to take another look at that, but I'm almost positive because
That's something that's got to be negotiated then or reconciled between House and Senate versions.
Well, we can talk about that. Right now, the House is expected to take up exactly what the Senate passed. So, we need, we can talk about that. But, and as Larry mentioned, fortunately, Indian country does have exemptions from those work requirements for both Medicaid and SNAP. But we need to keep a close eye because after this, if this bill passes, when it passes, states are going to have to update their Medicaid requirements, their SNAP requirements. And even though, Native Americans, anybody who's eligible to receive healthcare through IHS, um, you're automatically going to be eligible. You still have to fill out that paperwork, and that's we got to make sure that our people are still signed up. We're still going to be subject to a lot of those paperwork burdens, and one additional indirect impact on Indian country, and I'm definitely not a healthcare expert. I don't know if Larry is, but uh, I think a fear down the road is, we see these rural hospitals closing up because they're losing that support from Medicaid. And, unfortunately, Indian health clinics, Indian health hospitals, they don't provide all the needed services to Indian country. They got to get referred out. And if we're getting referred out to a hospital that's closing up and you got a family that's got to drive an additional 100, 200 miles just to get, find a good working hospital, it's going to hurt everybody.
And it's still incredible to me that, Thune is right in the middle of all this in South Dakota, you know what I mean? And yet still that's where the pain's going to be felt in the Midwest and in the farms and the excuse the California term, flyover states, you could smile. I did that on purpose. That was a joke. So now, you know what I mean? Even, Diane Titus, she's a Democrat, you know what I mean? How much juice is she going to have in this thing? Even if she wants to do the legislation, I mean, the Democrats are on the sidelines, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. I mean, again, through reconciliation, Republicans don't have to negotiate anything with the Democrats, but, I hope after this bill passes that, there's some little breath of life to bipartisanship. Something like this wagering tax. I mean, there is a gambling caucus in the House, and it's pretty bipartisan. I think Guy Rushenthaler Republican from Pennsylvania is the Republican co-chair, and I think Titus is the Democratic co-chair. So there are going to be some bipartisan measures where we can hopefully get something positive done.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, you have your when is your annual conference?
It's in November,
Oh, it's in
16th.
November.
Yeah,
Yeah.
16th through the 21st
So, and that's in Seattle. So we
in
could very
Seattle.
well be dealing with this still, John, for next year's budget in November. Because typically that's, they wait until right before Thanksgiving to finally concede and just do a CR, right? And then
Well, they'll do the CR on September 30th, and they'll extend. They'll kick it to either November or December. Yep.
okay. So this will be ripe, Larry, for, again, getting Indian country around the table and seeing how we want to proceed. Because I don't know when we need to take more drastic measures in terms of, if we need to be, marching on Capitol Hill every once a month. Because one of the things that they're going to have a hard time is sort of, placing Indian country in some kind of special interest group category, because we don't fall under any of those types of deals. And I think, especially now, for the most part, a lot of people in the country recognize, as you said, the solemn duty to treaty tribes and tribal governments that are exercising their sovereignty. And there's still some states that are not the best, but what do you think, Larry? I mean, I think that Indian country's message encompasses a lot of these cuts and we might actually have more constituents than we know, because those rural hospitals, Larry, they don't just serve tribal citizens. I mean, some of them are serving more non-Indians than Indians.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think there's making sure that we don't inundate Congress or administration with a letter on each issue, but and so, that could have the opposite effect, but making sure it is strategic and it is, it in a critical area. And I think that's one of the things that has shown the importance of this coalition on those 35, 36 different entities that are part of it, representing specific issues like IGA, NIHB, NIEA, but also the other intertribal organizations, and really being mindful of the fact why the coalition came together, because there was so much information that was being put out or misinformation, and trying to, that would have been too much for any one organization.
Mhm.
And then by extension, knowing that not all of our tribes have the resources to keep up on that either. And so having that unity of voice through the coalition, and leaning on the expertise that exists in each one, and taking the lead, and being able to support that, and at the end of the day, with NCAI and its kind of umbrella role for Indian country, the importance of uplifting resolutions that will come out of the coalition, but also the information that the coalition shares with the tribal nations themselves, to have that resolution process still be as important as it is, and knowing that the recognition that Congress and the administration give to NCAI as a whole, not diminishing anybody else, just knowing that in the history of NCAI, there's been over 5,000 resolutions that have passed, and until they're rescinded, they still stand. And knowing that, so how do we continue to educate and elevate these important issues to make sure that Congress doesn't forget. And I think it's, by extension, we keep saying get out the vote. The native vote is critical, and we can see how critical it was, and it needs to be again. And again, I think it's really relying on all of Indian country to understand the importance of who those elected leaders are. And again, we're not saying Democrat or Republican. We need them both, but we need to continue to help Indian country identify those candidates for office that support our issues, understand our issues, and will defend those issues when they get there. And we know now is as critical time as ever, and we see the importance of those in office have an effect by their votes on what happens for Indian country. And so it's not one thing, that's for sure. And I think that's what's been very hard for all of Indian country to digest, and know that where we are today with the Senate passage of this bill, and knowing what the House may do, we could have a whole different conversation come Monday.
John, real quick, let's just put a bow on that one. I mean, what do you think the prospects are of the House is not going to pass the Senate version? I mean, do you think they'll make changes? I mean, but that pushes it past July 4th if they start making changes, right? I mean, what is going to happen here?
That I doubted the power of the president's whip power last month. I didn't think they were going to get it done. But sure enough, they got 215 to 214. I don't doubt that the House passes this version.
Wow.
I think it's going to be close, but you're exactly right. If the House makes even one change to the bill, it has to go back to the Senate, and then we go through it all again. They know that. I mean, the July 4th deadline is arbitrary. That
Right.
The only true deadline for purposes of this bill, because one thing this bill also does is raise the federal debt limit by $5 trillion. And that's really the deadline that they're working on. So when the government reaches its debt ceiling, they don't, Republicans don't want to have another vote, because most Republicans don't support raising the debt ceiling. They know they'll have to compromise with Democrats on that. So they included that debt limit increase in this bill so they don't have to do that down the road. That's why I think, they're doing all they can to get this thing through the House now.
I see. Well, I mean, and Larry, let's just one other, we talked about the impacts on education. Oh, no, we didn't. That's what I want to talk about, education, because we heard some information today that it's basically gonna just wipe out. Is that right? John, funds to Indian education at this point. And somebody today, and I think it was from NIEA or maybe ACES, Larry, that just said, the HBCUs are getting their money, but tribal colleges, it's not in there right now.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, that's not reconciliation. That is the appropriations process. The president's budget did propose, I believe, zeroing out tribal college funding through Interior. I think Indian education, construction would take like an 80% cut. Like $48 million down from $235 million in FY25. But again, that's appropriation. So that we'll see what the House Interior Appropriations Committee is probably going to come out with their version of the FY26 funding bill within the next week or two. They were supposed to mark it up last week and it got pulled. But as far as education in the reconciliation package, Larry probably knows more about this than I do. I know there were some tax provisions in there to promote school choice vouchers. I don't believe they directly impact Indian country, but I'll leave it to Larry.
Yeah, and that's what we're continuing to hear. But I think, whether it's, but again, I think that's the hard part and some of the confusion to a lot of this is understanding the difference between policy and budget, and as the budgets are being determined and not knowing exactly what the president's next budget is going to be or where we're going to end up here, that it's hard to say if they're not going to allocate funding for that. It really, any promises are meaningless on that front. But I think that's the other piece to try to continue to educate on is that that specific example of why would HBCUs be considered different than TCUs and that piece and even the disconnect to that, to say, first you want this work requirement for these programs, but then the thing that helps Indian country the most is the TCUs to educate our people to get them into those kind of positions. And then you eliminate that program. And so you just exacerbated that requirement. And so to TCUs still aren't out of the woods yet, but just that, not being able to connect those kind of dots to see how one impacts the other are the things that we got to continue to make sure that we don't let them lose sight of.
Right.
Gentlemen, the only thing that seems to have worked is, if you looked at the public land debate from a week ago, you know what I mean? That was the big deal. Everybody was freaked out. They want to sell all public land, all parks, and yet there was a big outrage about this. And it was kind of a slow burn in the beginning too, because it really just kind of grew and grew and grew as people understood. What happened there, John? Is there anything? Are there lessons here for us in this issue?
Yeah, there's coalitions to be had for sure. This debate about selling off public land started in the House. In the House version, there was a provision that would have mandated the sale of public lands in Utah, approximately 500,000 acres of public lands in Utah and Nevada.
Which is where all the mining is, where it's supposed to lithium mines, where there's all the next rare earth minerals type of thing, right?
They're claiming that they want to sell these lands to address the housing crisis, but But yeah, no, you're exactly right. That's what's going to end up. So in the House, this provision was pushed by actually one of the Nevada Congressman Amidei and the Utah Congresswoman Malloy, who, no lie, I believe by marriage is related to the Bundys. Her uncle is Cliven Bundy, and her cousin is Eamon Bundy. Um,
Wow.
but there was an outcry by.
So that makes perfectly sense. That's genetic mutation of some sort.
But that, there was an outcry among conservatives in Western states, most notably Ryan Zinke from Montana. He said if that provision stays in, I'm a no, and they couldn't afford to lose any votes, so they pulled that provision from the bill in the House. Um, the bill goes over to the Senate. The Senate crafts their own package. Mike Lee, senator from Utah, who's also chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate, he said he puts that same provision on steroids. His provision would have initially mandated the sale of between 2 and 3 million acres of public lands in 11 different Western states. This is Forest Service lands and BLM lands. It wouldn't include National Monument and some other lands. But a little more than a week ago, the Senate parliamentarian who you mentioned earlier, Victor, she said that provision does not meet the budgetary requirements. So the provision was stripped. Mike Lee did not give up. He kind of narrowed it down to focus only on public lands. He tried to make it a tighter correlation between addressing housing needs, which his previous provision would have just, we would have seen like dozens of new Dutton ranches cropping up all over the West and a lot more oil and gas production. But his updated provision was a lot more narrow, focusing on BLM, but it also had to be strictly tied to housing, and the lands had to be, within a certain proximity of communities of a population more than 1,000. So I don't believe that provision was ruled out of order, but there were at least a good handful of Republican senators who said, if that's in, I'm out. So Lee he preempted their amendment, which would have stripped that provision. He pulled it out late Saturday night, right before they started reading the bill.
Wow. I
mean, so did you say Eamon Bundy or Ted Bundy? I didn't catch that one because they seem to be both the same.
Al Bundy.
Even better. Even better.
Well, and
wow. So go ahead, Jason.
Well, I just think, Larry, what you were saying earlier about, any country, things have definitely changed because, and we've seen the change even in our allies, whether it was with Congressman Tom Cole or Senator Markwayne Mullin. Some of these folks that they just, we're gonna have to ride or die with them, but they haven't shown any willingness to buck the president either. And maybe, I don't know what it's going to take, Larry, but at some point, we've got Murkowski. She seems to be very receptive to a lot of the Indian countries' issues and arguments of why we can't afford any cuts. But I'm not seeing the support that we've seen in the past. That sort of reflexive support that saved us from some of the worst Bush cuts. It's a weird dynamic in the Republican Party. They're just so damn afraid of Trump, and you're seeing it with the senator from North Carolina. He's not going to run again because he's going to vote against his bill. It's really weird. So I think we've got to start rethinking our lobbying principles from top to bottom. What do you think, Larry?
Yeah, I think especially early on, some of our most staunchest supporters were saying, we just need to let the dust settle and see where things are. Well, I don't know if the dust has settled at all, if it's ever gonna. But to your point, what's said in one environment isn't necessarily reflective at the end, and that's something that I think Indian country needs to continue to support our staunchest allies in Congress, and and find ways to help them um, in whatever that looks like. And at the end of the day, John, you said it earlier, the whip machine from the White House is probably stronger than it's ever been. And those that don't fall in line are worried about that. And they may say they're not going to vote for this all day long, but at the end of the day, they vote for it. And so that is part of the calculation that we're faced with. And I don't know that anybody has a clear path forward on what is the best method for us to um, educate and advocate with those that are voting, other than making sure that the strength of Indian country's voice is being heard. And
I think you're gonna have to get a lobbyist from North Korea, you know what I mean, or something like, or somebody that knows how to work within these systems like this. I think maybe Putin. I don't know.
well, Indian country couldn't come together to provide a big gold jet either. So
Right. Right.
They got to sleep at the wheel. We got a big, I don't know, a golden calf or something like that. That seems about right around now, right?
Larry's right on education, though. I mean, it's the coalition, NIHB, Indian country overall stepped up early. We knew Medicaid was going to be one of their big targets, and we got out there early, educating all our champions in the House and the Senate, especially the Republicans, because we knew they were going to be in control. And we talked about that healthcare is the most basic, the core treaty and trust obligation. Many Indian health clinics rely 50% of their funding comes from Medicaid. I mean, that if that provision hit Indian country, it would have crippled dozens, hundreds of hospitals throughout Indian country. So that early advocacy worked. We gotta arm our friends with the information, education that we need. And Jason, I hear you. I mean, some of our friends, they're not saying publicly what we'd like them to say. But when you go publicly, when you go out in public against this administration, you end up getting sidelined, and then you can't do anything on our benefit. So I think what is happening is there are some closed door discussions going on, phone calls being made, and I as bad as this bill is, it could have been so much worse for Indian country.
Yeah, I mean, Victor, I mean, we're coming to the conclusion of this, but I mean, it is hard to reconcile with what Trump said he was going to do for the working class and everyone else, and reconcile it with this bill. And we can sit here and lament that Democrats have feckless PR and communication skills on detailing this, but it really is just a strange time. And I encourage everyone to pay attention to the jobs report tomorrow. The last jobs report was still positive, but way down, well below 200,000 new jobs.
I think they said 44,000 jobs were lost today. Is that what it was on the?
Well, no, that was I think that's the payroll report, which is different than the unemployment report, which is the monthly report that will come out tomorrow. But that's not a good harbinger, because it was like negative 33,000 is what they reported today, and they were expecting gains of 110. So we're seeing some kind of slowdown in the job market. And obviously I would directly relate it to what's going on with immigration. People are just not going to work at this point, and then all the government layoffs, and he's shuffling people out of the government jobs. I don't think that's been fully captured yet. So, John, if things go south economically, say by the end of the year, early next year, can Congress go back and start to undo some of these things? Or, because more people lose their jobs, the more people are going to be seeking benefits, and now all of a sudden they're not eligible. I mean, you could have a real mess in this country.
Yeah, it's I mean, next year is going to be the election year and midterm election year, so it's always more difficult to get anything done during those kind of years. But at the same time, if there is an economic crisis, maybe that could bring people together to either undo some of these things or fix, focus on what needs fixed. Yeah,
Okay.
they there is talk of another reconciliation package, which would again be a Republican only bill. Um, I, I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's
You know,
like,
let's go. Before we go, let's get. Go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead, Larry.
I apologize.
no, I was just going to say it's part of the manufactured crisis. In the first Trump term, when some of those economic actions had significant negative impacts on agriculture and farmers, there was a bailout package for that to make things better. And so, to your point, would something like that happen? I mean, it's happened before. Would something like that happen again? That I think that remains the question. But also, who would benefit from that kind of package? And typically, Indian country hasn't on that level. And so, I think that's part of the calculation for us.
I will
Well,
say,
listen,
Victor, Victor, this might
ahead.
be a podcast for us come August, September.
Oh,
but
absolutely,
but
absolutely. We're
that,
not even close to being done
but
with this
that
conversation.
the ADP payroll report today, most of the job losses were in the services sector, which is, directly related to gaming and entertainment as well. So, and we can tell you, at least our northern tribes are reporting such a downturn in customers coming over the border from Canada that I'm sure they've had no choice but to lay folks off. And I know Mekwasakni up there, Mohawks are, they've had to cut hours because they just don't have the volume anymore. So, so something is going on and it's rolling out very slowly. And I don't know that all this tariff insecurity makes it any better either. So, I'm just amazed that, the stock market's at an all-time high and things
I know,
going
right?
along
Cognitive
swimmingly.
dissonance, I believe, is the word.
Yeah, but I feel like on the ground it's a little bit different. You see it in consumer sentiment as well. It's way low. So,
Well, you're seeing it. You're seeing it in the gaming industry. You're seeing, Las Vegas, is laying all their dealers. One of the casinos just laid off all the retail workers for the restaurants, and everything is going back to one big thing. So they're all still trying. Las Vegas is just getting cooked right now, and I think we need to come back. I think after this is done and look at how it's going to affect the tribes. We have a good question here about the big beautiful bill and the clean energy program and how that's going to impact tribal gaming and operations. We just did a thing on energy, and I think everything we talked about is moot. I know my conversation with Shannon Miller was absolutely moot at this point.
It is.
So unless you get that big outrage coming, that seems to be the only thing that works. But time is very limited, and the system is rigged.
Musk is outraged over the tax credit cuts, but
listen, he's going to be in South Africa by the end of the summer, man, or Mars. You know what I mean?
Right.
Mars, South Africa.
But there again, crippling the renewable energy sector. When a state like Iowa, and then you can throw in Nebraska, Oklahoma, they have huge wind farms. I mean, and that employs tens of thousands of people. It makes no sense to all of a sudden. And it's not just they got rid of some of the tax credits, John. They're imposing new taxes like on solar. So if our solar companies use more than 80% of the materials from overseas, they have to pay a tax. This is going to put them out of business because everything comes from overseas, all the raw materials and everything.
Yeah.
There's
and those solar panels, that's everybody's business models based on those cheap Chinese solar panels.
Yeah, right. And
as somebody who's looking at solar right now too, and I'm right in the middle of this, you'd think, I would have done it years ago, but here I am.
Yeah, it's really a self-destructive bill in a lot of ways, and I guess we're just gonna whistle on with it, and and hope it does. But I already think you're seeing stuff on the ground that's not good for this administration. And so we'll see where it goes. I'm glad you guys came today. I mean, obviously, Larry, we're so glad to be part of the coalition. And frankly, you don't need to make apologies for, how big and well-known NCI is. They've been around since 1944. Even when we're lobbying stuff, the senators, congressmen, well, where's NCI's position? What is NCI's position on this? It's just built in over here in Congress that NCI sort of has, the mouthpiece for big national across the board policy that isn't gambling. So, we rely on those resolutions that NCI has, and we try to pass stuff every year, get the word out, because we know that Congress, that's what they look at first, is where is NCI at on this. So we
No,
working with you guys.
no, I appreciate that, but I also, I couldn't be prouder of the work that's gone into the creation of the coalition and the number of organizations and intertribal orgs that have joined, and that we continue to add. We just added another one today, and we have several more that are considering. But it really shows the strength of Indian country, and and not to forget about the lawyer law community that
Right.
works on behalf of Indian country. It really, for us to continue to do this fight, it's going to take all of us together and come
Larry,
together. And not to state the obvious, the one thing that's for sure is none of us will keep fighting to defend Indian country.
Larry, I want to see what they all look like, whether it's on the Capitol steps. We'll get them all out here, Victor. Might look like January 6th or something, but with a bunch of, tomahawks and, nice tribal flags. We'll be respectful.
Buffalo horns.
Yeah.
Flag
But Larry,
I think I've seen that look before.
I'd love to see that coalition, out getting some skin in the game on the ground in DC, because I think that's what it's going to take for them to start to back off.
It wouldn't be unprecedented when they opened NMAI. How many showed up for that? 20,
Exactly.
25, 30,000?
Exactly, Larry.
So it may take something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So,
John,
all right,
we didn't forget about you, my friend. Thank you again so much for coming in and educating us. We really appreciate it, both you guys. I mean, we're going to continue having a conversation. People want to know how it's going to affect Indian country. And Mike, I apologize, we didn't do a summary point. We're just having a conversation here. But gentlemen, thank you so much. This is a continuing conversation, and we really appreciate all the hard work you're doing. We really do.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honor to be here.
And for all the attendees, we'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about DFS 2 in California, what's going down over there. Never boring in California, that's for sure. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much. We'll see you guys next week. And happy 4th of July, everyone.
Great.